Welcome everyone to our Selling Your Solar Home webinar with Solar United Neighbors. I'm going to give everyone just about 30 seconds for everyone to get logged in, and then we'll get started here. Thanks everyone so much for being here. Great, we'll get started. Welcome again, everyone, to our Selling Your Solar Home webinar. If you'd like to drop into the chat your name and where you're joining us from, we'd love to see where we have folks from. We're super excited to have so many people joining us here tonight, and we will get started. Just to go over some logistics, we welcome any questions, and the best way to ask those will be on the bottom bar of your Zoom screen. You'll see the chat and the Q&A feature. So for questions that you have for our panelists that are joining us tonight, it would be great to add them to the Q&A. That way we can organize and see the questions as they come in. And then we'd love to have you keep the chat feature for conversation with others in the attendance of the webinar. So again, put questions into the Q&A. And it's fun to see where everyone's joining from. I see some Minnesota, Florida, Ohio, Indiana, folks joining us from all over the place. So once again, thanks everyone for joining us, and we will get started. Our overview is we're going to kick it off with some introductions, chat a little bit about the value of your solar home, and then talk about selling your solar home from a couple different perspectives, the perspective of solar homeowner, a realtor, and an appraiser. And then we'll have a lot of time for a Q&A afterwards where you can ask your questions from all of our panelists. And for those of you who are not familiar with Solar United Neighbors, we help folks to go solar, join together, and fight for their energy rights. We're a nonprofit, and we're really excited to have you all here for this join together portion of our mission, where we are bringing together folks tonight who are solar owners and solar advocates throughout the country to chat more about this topic. And my name is Alexis Miller. I'm the Director of Community Impact at Solar United Neighbors, and I'm joined by my colleague, Corey Ramsden, who is the VP of Go Solar Programs. Corey, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. As Alexis said, I'm VP for Go Solar Programs here at Solar United Neighbors. I'll be with my camera off and working the chat this evening, but our programs are the ones that support all of our co-ops and other programming in 12 states, as well as nationally, including our Go Solar Help Desk, which has free services for anybody interested in going solar all across the country. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. And we'll have him drop into the chat some of those links if you are interested in going solar. We do have a whole suite of services to be able to help you do that. And then we are so lucky to be joined by our panelists tonight. They'll also be able to introduce themselves as they go through our presentation, but we're lucky to be joined by Martin Taylor, a solar homeowner, Catherine Hope Cunningham, a realtor and solar consultant, Jonathan Asker, an appraiser, and Janelle McGill, who is a realtor. So thank you so much to all our panelists for spending the evening with us. We're so lucky to have them be a part of this presentation. And we also want to put a plug for, we have a guide about selling your solar home. So we'll drop in the link into the chat, as well as include this in the follow-up email for everyone. But we have a lot of tips and tricks to help guide you through that. So that's a great resource to have, as well as this webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to chat, but just as a reminder, please put your questions into the Q&A. And if you have any questions about how to go solar, we do have Corey, but you can also reach out to our team there at helpdesk@solarunitedneighbors.org. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see our panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to chat more.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Catherine Hope Cunningham. I am a realtor in Central Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio. And previous to being a realtor, I became a solar energy consultant. I have a great love for educating folks about both real estate and solar energy. And I have a couple of resources that I would like to share with you today, which are not widely known. And there's always a ongoing conversation about how solar and just green features in general affect property value. And so there is a resource that I would like to share that many people don't know about. And in fact, most realtors actually don't know about this as well. And that is the NAR Sustainability Report. And so Alexis is sharing it with you in the chat. And this is a 27-page report. It is based on a survey of brokers and realtors that is done every spring. And it's a great resource because it is completely unbiased. And so if you're looking for some statistics to use to leverage an argument about whether or not green features affect property value, this is the document that you want to point to, because it is collected by folks who are not necessarily for or against green features. They just want to understand how it affects their industry. And so it is a long-ish document, but you can see if you scroll through it that it's just a lot of charts and graphs. But one of the things that I think that's very interesting is that year over year, if you've been watching this come out, every spring, like I have for a while, you can see that the trend is that consumers are more and more wanting green features in their homes, and that would apply to solar as well. And there are a couple of really brief takeaways that I want to share with you. First of all, obviously, that is a good resource for you to reference. And when talking about solar, go ahead and quote this document. However, in practice, when you are actually selling your home, what I have found is that although, yes, this document does say that green features do improve the resale value of a home, and you can point to those statistics, I think what's really more important when you go to sell your home is, as far as property value, what is a larger factor in that is what the rates are doing at any given time. So just today, or I guess it was yesterday, we had an increase in to answer your question, Shelley, no, I'm not going to show the document. It's a very long document. I don't want to go all the way through it. I'll let you do that on your own, but I'm just going to tell you a really quick story about two houses that I sold this year. One was in February, it was a solar house, and the other one was in June. So when the rates were down rather significantly in February, had a solar house, and I was concerned a little bit about selling a solar house in February, especially since there was a big storm about 3 days before I put it on the market. Turns out it was not a factor at all. It sold very quickly and for well above the listed price. And that was largely because there was so much competitive bidding for that house. And that was largely because the rates were down so low. On the flip side of that, couple of months later, in June, I believe it was halfway through June, the rates went up 3/4 of a point in one day, which was the largest rate increase since 1994. And that really, in many ways, leveled and in some cases halted competitive bidding. And so that does affect property value even more so than any particular feature of a house, including solar. So my best advice to you is, if you're going to sell your home and it has solar, or really anything, please pay attention to when the feds meet, and get that on your calendar. If they start to talk about potentially raising the interest rates, you might want to think about getting the house on the market soon or before that happens. And so those are my two biggest takeaways from as it pertains to real estate and solar energy. The last frequently asked question that I get often is, I often am asked, am I going to be able to recoup my costs, right? If I go solar, if I put out all this money, am I going to be able to recoup this money? And of course, the answer to that is, well, if you're worried about that, try to stay in the home for about as much time as it takes to recoup that cost. That's going to be different depending upon where you live, right? So I can't necessarily answer that question because we have lots of different geographic areas represented here. For me in Central Ohio, that's roughly 7-ish years. For somebody else in another geographic area, it's going to be a different amount of time. But honestly, my answer to that question is, after that amount of time, after 7 years, stop worrying because you've already gotten all of that money back. So that's my best answer is really, if you're worried about that, try to plan on being there long enough term that you can recoup all of those costs, and then you don't have to worry about it because property values do fluctuate with the rates.
Thank you so much for sharing, Catherine. I'm going to pass it over to Martin to chat more about his experience selling his own home with solar on it.
Hey, how's everyone doing tonight? Virtual waves, right? So there we go. So a little bit about myself. I'm retired Air Force. I served like right at 21 years. I'm on the advisory board in Florida for Solar United Neighbors. So a little bit about the different home situations. I've sold a home with solar, and it's a great setup from Catherine as well, because she said, to stay in it about 6 to 7 years, not worry about it. And unfortunately, 1 year later, we sold a home that had solar on it, unexpected. So I'll go into that. And then we also have a home, a short-term rental with solar on it more recently. So kind of what I'll talk about, and then I'll look at the messages and things like that, is why I got a home with solar, how to account for sizing the solar on the home. And I think, again, Catherine kind of touched on that a little bit as well, how I went about selling the home, and then the overall pros and cons. So to start off, why I got home with solar. At the time, I was projecting to, I was about 4 or 5 years out from retirement, military retirement at least. And I was thinking about, every year, different things keep going up. So I was looking for constants, like your principal and interest on your mortgage and things like that. And then I was looking at the variables, like the taxes and things like that, right? That go up year to year. So I was trying to, mark out how many things could I keep constant. And the one thing that I knew was that the power bill constantly went up by a variable rate year to year, right? So I said, okay, we had just got a pool, and I was looking to figure out how can, we get save as much money, because that's what I'm about, trying to save money. And I'm sure that's what most people first thought is when it comes to getting solar on your home. So, so basically what I did at that point in time was I did a Google search about, hey, what does the average home sell for? Sorry, not the average home, but what does the average home with solar sell for? It spit out a number, and when I ended up talking to an installer, in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about that. Not that I was super concerned about it, but I was, trying to be overly conservative in doing that. So did that. I calculated the tax credit. Some unforeseen stuff in the family happened, and we had to sell the house. They installed it. We had to sell it 1 year later. So now I'll get into how I sold the home. So the first thing, and a realtor definitely will be able to help out this, but you look at comps, right? And I looked at comps without the solar first. So, you spell out a number, roughly, let's just say it was 300K, right? And I said, if my home is this and that, then let me see if I can start off by just recouping what I put into it, not the tax credit, because at the time, I want to say it was a 30% tax credit. So the entire amount. And, we got with the realtor, there was some education that went into it. And we listed the home, and we were actually able to recoup the entire amount 1 year later. So it could have been, maybe it was a fluke or one-off, but I think the biggest portion was our realtor showing the value of it, right? And numbers, people like raw numbers to see that. So we were able to, determine that hey, if you buy this home with solar versus this one without it over a period of time, what that looks like. So we had a very good experience with that. And then the last thing was, the realtor education piece of it. So that was probably because this home was in 2017, 2018 timeframe. And I think it's a lot better now, my personal opinion. But at the time, I don't think many people were up to speed on it as we are. It's like a green revolution going now. So people, from cars and things like it's cool and sexy today, right? But back then, in my opinion, it wasn't that cool, right? So we educated the realtor. She was great. She was able to show the raw numbers, and it was a done deal. We were able to recoup all the money to include the purchase price, because you got to remember, during the time we received a tax credit back. And everyone's situation is different than that. So we actually made additional money selling that home with solar. So the overall, pros and cons. Really, there was no cons with the exception of selling the home 1 year later, right? But we decided to do it again on a rental property that we have. So apparently, I like to save money, and it does when you start to look at that. And then the other con was really just the education part, getting that and understanding and getting it out to people. So another member, he mentioned to make sure that the education for realtors is up to speed, because once they know that, most people, in my opinion, if they're properly educated, would prefer to purchase a house with solar than without, especially if it's on someone else's dime too. So, and the only other thing I would probably add to that is, not for myself, but a lot of times people go with fancy vehicles and things like that to go about solar. I'm a finance guy, so we financed it, but making sure that, you properly size that system to account for the future sale. So you don't want to be the biggest house in the neighborhood and then get the most expensive PV system put on your roof, because it probably won't sell. So sizing it right is super important. And from there, like Catherine said, I think if you have it on more than a few years, should be good to go. But I'll look in the room for any questions, and I'll pass it back to you, Alexis.
Thank you, Martin, for sharing that perspective. I'm going to then pass it on to Janelle to talk about from a realtor's perspective, and touch on the points that Martin brought up as well about education with realtors and how to best work that from the solar homeowner's perspective.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janelle McGill, and I'm coming to you from Colorado. And we're trying to work on my laggy video, so I apologize that words are not going to match up with the video you see on the screen. But we have a storm going through, and I don't know if that's causing Wi-Fi issues. But anyway, I am a realtor in Colorado, and my background is actually in renewable energy. And I had some friends that had issues with selling their solar home in the mid-teens. And I decided, why is this an issue when this is kind of my life's passion? So I'm going to get my real estate license, and I'm going to figure this out from the inside. And I have a CE course that I teach to agents all across the state. Agents are licensed per state, so my class is not available elsewhere. But throughout here in Colorado, I've taught hundreds of agents, and I do this class for free just to sort of create this larger base of educated agents that can help people sell their solar homes. I'm also on the advisory board for Solar United Neighbors. Since day one, I was part of the very first co-op that we did in Fort Collins. And that's how I got solar on my house. And it was a really fun process. So anybody considering going solar, do it through a co-op. If there's one in your area, it is a really good, fun experience. And I'm also on the real estate task force with the American Solar Energy Society, and I speak at their conferences every year. So, okay, so enough about me. Let me get into kind of some nitty gritty stuff that I think homeowners and people considering solar need to consider when they are getting ready to sell their house or thinking about buying a house that has solar. And the first thing to know is that educated agents, appraisers, and lenders exist. So the first thing you need to do is find them And that can sometimes feel like, okay, just about any agent that you're going to call up is going to say, oh, yes, I can help you. Absolutely. But you need to know what kind of questions to ask them. Have they sold homes with solar before? Have they had issues with that? Do they know how to value solar? Have they taken classes? So in Colorado, they can take my class. But if they're elsewhere, the National Association of Realtors has a class called Selling the Sun. And it's available as a CE credit if you're in certain areas, or just general education, but it is an amazing class that anybody across the entire country can take. And if it's something that they say, no, they haven't taken, I would say, thank you very much for visiting. After you've taken the class, I'd love to talk to you more, because you really can't take on a solar transaction until you have education to do so. The next part is what do you need to do as a homeowner to be able to provide, to vet, to just understand what needs to happen to get it done? Sorry, everyone.
I think
Oh, shoot.
Okay, so sorry. This is the drawback of Zooming and having dogs in the house. So what do homeowners need to provide? Okay. I can go like turn off. So one of the things that homeowners need to understand is the difference between having a leased system and a purchased system. Leases are not good in residential. If you're approached by solar installers and you're talked into leasing, please don't do it. And if you already have it, it's okay, we'll figure it out. But the best situation with residential real estate is to have an owned system. That doesn't mean it has to be paid off, but it needs to be a purchase system, either that you've paid cash for or that you have a loan for. If it's a lease, it is not considered real property, which means it can add zero value in an appraisal, and it can add zero value to a buyer. And in most cases, those are the times that a lot of other agents go, oh, I had these terrible transactions, but they were usually leases. So those leases cause issues because you're asking a buyer to take on those leases. And that's based off of a prior homeowner's energy usage, lifestyle that may or may not match up with who the new purchaser is. So we're going to kind of set that aside because we're talking about selling your solar house, and let's try to focus on the purchase part. So if you did purchase it, whether you have a loan left or not, usually your best bet when you're selling is to go ahead and pay off that solar loan at closing with your proceeds, which hopefully you have some proceeds. If you happen to have some of the rare loans out there that are assumable by a buyer, then you might be able to talk them into taking it on, but you're trading that for adding additional value to your house, because they're not going to say, I'm going to pay a premium for your house if I'm also taking over your loan. So just think about those two things. In the state of Colorado, we have some really great energy programs that are through the state. And so those loans are non-assumable and they're the best interest rate. So most of the loans that we have here are non-assumable, but a lot of the national solar companies and those national loan are. So if you cannot get additional value for your house, perhaps in a suppressed market like we're seeing right now, then maybe asking a buyer to assume the rest of that loan will make sense. The next thing everybody needs to know, and your agent needs to know, is how exactly do I figure out what that premium price is for my house? How do I add that additional value? And where's the documentation for that? Here's the biggest thing you can grab today, pvvalue.com. This is a standardized platform that no matter where you are, when you installed, how big your system is, what your utility rates are. It is all plugged into the system and a number spits out the other end. This is how you figure out what your contributory value is to your house when you base the rest of what your house is worth off of other neighborhood comps. So if you have an agent that knows how to do this, or you don't, but you know that it exists, because this is a website anybody can access at any time. So at any point during your ownership of your solar panels, you can go on to pvvalue.com and plug in all of your information and watch what your value is added over time. One of the biggest questions that I get is, well, the system was $32,000, so I want to see $32,000. And what I advise everybody is that solar is not unlike a lot of other renovations that you do to your house. You don't expect to get dollar for dollar for your kitchen. You don't expect to get dollar for dollar for your finished basement. But what you are going to get out of pvvalue.com is what the energy production, that actual income projected over time is. And that can be used to hand over to an appraiser that has hopefully been vetted. And I'm sure Jonathan's going to let us know his experience in this later. But there is a process for getting an appraiser that knows about pvvalue.com too. So first, find an agent that knows what they're doing. Second, know what you have. Is it purchased versus lease? Third, know what your value is and how to ask your agent to figure that out. And that's how you can list your home. Next is provide all of that documentation. Grab 12 months of utility bills. Take pictures of the solar system. Put those in the photo slide so that while people are going through Zillow, they go, oh, they have solar and look at how big the system is. And I'm going to see what their utility bills are and if I'm getting anything back for that. So make sure that they see the value that you're experiencing. Then next, when you have a buyer, you're going to need to do all of this education for them too, because the reality is, and all of the arguments that I get in on all these realtor platforms that are national, agents don't know this. And a lot of them don't care. So you have to try to find that common ground of, we want to do this deal and your buyer wants this house. Let me help educate you on what it is you're seeing on this house. And let me help you educate your buyer by providing all of this so that you look like a rock star having all of the answers, even if this isn't your forte. Then the next thing you need to do is ask that buyer's lender if they know how to request a specialized appraiser. And then you ask for that specialized appraiser. There's some classes that appraisers take, and I'm not going to step on Jonathan's presentation here, but there are questions that you can ask and say, this house is a specialized property, it has solar, and it needs to be valued by somebody that understands how to value solar. And when that appraiser comes back and says, yes, I know about pvvalue.com, or I've taken the Appraisal Institute's classes on this, then great, they can come and appraise your home. But this is kind of the role that a listing agent can play. It's the one time that they can shut this deal down by not letting somebody into your house that doesn't know what they're doing. And if you're really trying to get additional value for your home, this is your best shot. It doesn't always work. There aren't appraisers in every market. There aren't educated agents in every market. But the drum that I beat at every conference and every time I'm teaching a class is that the more that consumers and homeowners ask for this education, the more it will come. So that's my best advice for trying to sell your solar home.
Thanks, Janelle. And we do have a request, if you don't mind dropping in the chat your website for the course that you have realtors take. So if we have folks in Colorado, they can use that resource. So thank you so much. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to add on and share his perspective from the appraisal point of view.
Certainly. Well, good evening, everyone. And you are actually had a treat tonight. These people know what they're talking about. And so I can just tell you that, yes, Janelle, thank you for stealing my thunder about PV value. Thank you for stealing my other fine point of competency. Great job, really great job. So really, that's how I just want to leave you just a few things about appraisers is that competency is just such an important thing for an appraiser, and you can't pick the appraiser. The broker can't pick them. The bank has to do it, but put pressure on them and say, listen, and if they say, oh, we found a competent one, like, okay, show me the certification. What did he do? Has he done it before? Instead of like, oh yeah, I can do it. So going back to, and I'll just say what I've seen other appraisers in my arguments with them several years ago. I've been doing this for 5 years on the solar side. And my appraiser would say, oh, well, I just gave it $5,000. And I said, okay, well, just help me understand this. If there was an oil well on the property and it pumped directly into the refinery and you didn't have to touch the oil, and the refinery gave you $2,500 a year for the next 25 years, you don't think that would add any value? You're like, oh, I see what you mean. And that's what we're talking about here. With PV value, which I use all the time to estimate solar residential, basically think of it like this. And this is, by the way, is done by the Department of Energy. Okay, it's a real legit site, PV value. And I would suggest real estate brokers get involved and learn how to do it, because then you'll have a discount cash flow, a whole list up for maybe from 1 to 25 years of how much that solar system is going to generate in money. Now, how much is it? How much per watt? Well, it depends on where you're at. Now, I live in Massachusetts. I pay 25 cents per kilowatt hour. That's really high. Florida is a lot different. So therefore, the same size system would be much more valuable where I'm at, because I have to pay so much. You save less money in Florida. I would save more. And I got to tell you, I saw the newspaper 2 days ago, the headline, in Massachusetts, we're going up by 30%. Because of the world crisis that we're in. So if you have solar now in Massachusetts or in New England, it's a good thing. So I just want to also agree with Janelle about leasing. Stay away from it, buy it out. It's just not what people are doing anymore. So what do I see? I see right in my area, $2 a watt is what I'm seeing for a system that's already up and running and has some depreciation on it. I do agree also that 5 to 7 years, you're seeing paybacks on this. There's also other things offered by states, like we're a very progressive state, Massachusetts. After you buy your solar system, they give you $1,000. Now, right now it's 26% that the federal government gives you as a discount tax credit. But after that, Massachusetts will also give you additional money for the next 10 years. And we used to call them SREPs. It's now called the SMART program, but it's just to reduce emissions. So I can't tell you enough that, I mean, so do I have solar in my house? No, I don't. And I know, well, if it's so great, why not? Well, I've got these beautiful trees right behind me. I'll have to cut them all down to get the sun, because I'm so far north, I got to go to the south. Other than that, I would definitely get solar. So find people who know what they're doing, and that includes appraisers. We are out there, but make the bank do the lead work for you. So I think I'm just going to stop right there. And if there's any questions that the panel can answer, that'd be great, but I'm still going to be available. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And thanks to all of our panelists for adding in your perspective. It's been wonderful to hear from everyone, and I think has been super useful to everyone who's attending. We do have some questions. And again, I'll remind everyone, we'll transition over to our Q&A period. If you do have questions, please drop them into the Q&A. It's easier for us to track them there and keep the chat as just chatter with other participants and attendees. Starting with Catherine, I think you're starting to answer this question, but I'll drop it since we've had a few people ask this question. Has there been any data, or does anyone have any information about if you have battery backup in addition to solar panels, does that seem to affect the value and price of your home and selling your solar home?
You know, I'm just going to take a quick stab at that, and I'll let Catherine go in there. I had the same question as a real estate appraiser, because I got to figure these things out. And we haven't really fully understood what the batteries are going to bring right now. And right now they're coming down in cost, these power walls. They're competing with generators, and generators are still less expensive right now. But I think as it drops, they're going to get more popular. But I'm interested to see what Catherine has to say.
So as far as I know, there's no collected data in the form of, statistics or anything like that. The vast majority of grid-tied systems do not have battery backup. And that's largely because The battery backup kind of just functions as a generator, essentially. It really only helps you when there is an outage. And so there's not going to be a whole lot of comps as far as trying to find something similar on the market. But what I will say is that what is very, very important when you go to sell that system, that's a hybrid system, that's both grid tied and with a battery backup, please make sure your buyers know that it has a battery backup system, that they're going to be able to weather storms better than anyone else, that they're going to be able to get through an outage without even basically the lights flickering. And if you are in a storm prone area, that is a very, very valuable thing. So I would say it's really all about marketing. I'm not aware of any graph or chart that you can necessarily point to about battery backup systems, but I think that you're going to find that the value lies in making sure that your buyers are aware that your system is a special system and it has advantages.
Thank you both for answering that. I know we've talked a bit about leasing your system a few times throughout the presentation, and we have a question from Tim, who has their solar panels are leased, but they're wanting to sell their home in the spring. Does anyone have any tips and tricks around that, or negotiating the sale of the house so that they're also able to pay off their lease? If anyone has any insight into that.
Yeah, I can answer some questions. One thing I teach in my classes and I tell buyers is that if the seller is willing to prepay that lease, it's a huge, amazing gift to the buyer. So should you be negotiating when you're selling, depending on what the situations are? I mean, right now with interest rates at 7.5, things are kind of coming to a grinding halt in a lot of places. So there's room for negotiation right now, and perhaps instead of a price drop, you can offer to prepay your lease payments, or drop the price on your house, but then have the buyer take over the lease payment. The thing to really notice, though, is what is it based off of? What is your family structure, and what are your utility costs? Because a new buyer is probably not going to experience the same thing. So you really have to be careful, and you have to do this with a sold system too. Your agent can't be listing things saying, hey, no utility bills with this house, because that's not the case. It's what you're experiencing, but it doesn't mean that anybody's going to experience it. So try to just be very forward about what your utility bills are, any sort of renewable energy credits or anything that you're still entitled to, even though you have a lease. These leases work different across the country. I've seen several where it's the lease company, say it's SolarCity, now Tesla, or Sunrun, I think is one of the other ones that's doing leases. They take all of the renewable energy credits, and they also take whatever's above production that you're not using. So there's very little value to the homeowner with those lease situations. But if you do get any of those, if you're getting some net metering, if you're getting some renewable energy credits, document that, show your utility bills, show that it's a fixed amount, which can be very attractive to some people. Also realize that almost all of those leases have built-in escalation pricing. So it's fixed per year, but each year that goes up a little bit. And when that end date is, and that it's not permanent. So even if you prepay it, make sure it's very clear that this is prepaid, but in the year 2032, then your lease is up and the lease company may or may not. Who knows? We're not at the end of any of these, and I'm very skeptical that people are going to start coming and taking panels off of roofs, but we'll see. But see what, just let them know that this is prepaid until then. You shouldn't have any maintenance costs. You shouldn't have to have any payments, and perhaps that could be something that could convince them into getting it, because it is harder with a lease, but the more information that you can provide and the more documentation to kind of take their worries and questions away, then the better chance you're going to have.
Thanks, Janelle. To follow up on that, you had mentioned SRECs or solar renewable energy credits, and Michelle had asked if those are able to be transferred to the new owner.
They should be. If you're receiving them for you, then the future homeowner should be able to receive the same thing.
And I would like to add is that when I value a home with solar, I don't include those because they don't have to be transferred. And if you have solar, why they don't ask for them, I give them.
That's a great clarification, Jonathan. Thank you. Jonathan, maybe Catherine, I'm curious, we have a question from Paul that says, is there depreciation due to the age of the panels in terms of what the value add is?
I'll go with that with PV value. Yes, we call it the degradation, and it's really just a scientific. These things are tested in labs for years and years. I mean, decades. They're out there in the desert, so they're measuring them, trying to figure out how much goes into this. So yeah, it's really a mathematical equation, and degradation is taken into account, but they don't degrade really all that much over 20 years, is from my understanding.
So I'm going to jump in and add to that. If they're using a tier 1 panel, the decrease in efficiency should be less than 0.5% per year. So that is part of what the UL listing process is for. So, that's why we like to recommend using tier 1 panels. Certainly we want to plan for the long term. Really, those panels are hopefully going to be there for life. And they're going to still continue to work just as they did when you installed them. The decrease in efficiency is so negligible, it's really not going to decrease that much in your lifetime.
Thank you both. Along the lines of what is more valuable, we have an anonymous question from an attendee asking if there's any change in value for a ground mounted system versus a rooftop system, and what that looks like. Catherine, I see you shaking your head.
There's really no change in actual value. What it could potentially change is the efficiency of getting the electric to its actual destination, depending on how far away that ground mounted system is. So while it may have an effect on efficiency, and usually most ground mounted systems are close enough that it really does not matter at all. But if you own a lot of land and your system is far, far away, that may be a factor. But as far as like the actual value and how that affects like purchase price, I don't think that it's really going to affect anything unless for some reason that ground mounted system might be an eyesore, like it's in a particular area that's, I don't know, high profile or high traffic or something like that. I just don't see that it would really make that much of a difference outside of, maybe that situation.
Thanks, Catherine. And Martin, maybe you can answer this question in relation to your experience. Betsy just asked if a warranty for your solar system transfers over to new owners since they have a 20-year warranty on her system that she has right now.
Yeah, in my case, it did, right? And that was one of those things when purchasing the PV system, we were making sure that in the event that we had to sell it, those type of questions and providing all the documentation. So we just had a binder. So our realtor had it. And if they had questions like that, hey, does it transfer? How much energy does it produce? All these different things was pretty quick and easy. So they were able to see the money that they were able to save by having that system there.
Can I add to that real quickly? Because both Janelle and Martin have emphasized the importance of having all of those questions answered from the get-go. I think it's really nice if you pull all of that information into one very easy document. So it's going to take a little bit of time. You might, create a PDF with all of the frequently answered or frequently asked questions, as well as a 12-month report of what the bills were for that address. And so the buyers can see how low those bills were. But try to get it all in one easy to download, maybe 2 or 3 page PDF that's straight and to the point and answers all of those questions. Because when you do that, what you find is that you don't get any questions because all of that stuff is in the MLS. It's all right there for very easy downloading. People can read for that themselves. And then the transaction becomes more about the home and less about the solar.
Thank you both for that insight. We have a question from Julia, who's asking, maybe Jonathan or Janelle, if you guys happen to know if the PV Value website uses specific utility rates to keep up with rate increases, or does it just use state averages per year and percentage hikes to calculate?
Before we get the real answer from Janelle, I just want to add my 2 cents on that, okay? Yes, they will look for the rate in your area, but I never use it because they use the generation rate only. And so in my state, that might be 14 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, then you got the delivery charge, transmission charge, you got the green charge. We have so many charges. I go from really 10 more cents. So what I do is I get a bill when I'm doing this whole thing. I get a bill from the property and I find out exactly how much it is because I say, how many kilowatt hours did they do? So I just did mine. I used 1,100 last month and I paid $280. So that's 25 cents. I just did the math. It's very easy to do. So I would encourage everyone because that's the real number you're saving, not just the generation charge. Janelle, can you correct me?
No, that's exactly right. And we have here in Fort Collins, we're crazy lucky and everybody is envious of us across the country because we have a community owned utility company and we have time of day pricing. So we have 7 cents a kilowatt hours on your off peak hours and 28 cents a kilowatt hour on your on peak kilowatt hours. Well, those on peak hours in the summer coincide with exactly when you're generating. So you're kicking that back to the system and getting a pretty nice paycheck at the end of the month when you're overproducing. But it makes that challenge of what is our utility rate? Is it 7? Is it 28? So you have to sort of figure out what an average is and all of those transmission. We have a lot of additional charges every utility bill does, kind of calculating that in there before you run it. But so the quick answer is yes, utility rates are one of the pages that you enter. It will auto pull where you are from because it pulls where you are on the map. So it's taking into account the tilt, the azimuth, your longitude, your latitude, the age of the system, your local utility costs, the size of the system, the degradation factor, all of that. So it's brilliant. It's amazing. Everybody should know about it. But the utility cost is that little bit of a variable that depending on how you enter that in, that income that you're producing, that dollar amount that's popped out at the end can vary depending on what you use as your value there.
Thank you both for adding that in. We have a question from Paul. I'm not sure who the best person would be to direct this to, so Corey, it might be you. So feel free to add in on how insurance companies calculate homeowners rates with solar and what that looks like.
I actually don't have an answer to that. I wish we had more insight into how insurance companies calculate that. I would be curious if anyone does.
I can answer that. So from experience, when we put solar on our home, we also simultaneously rehabbed our kitchen as well. And I called the insurance company, let them know those 2 things, wanted to make sure that the value on our home insurance reflected that. And the answer that I got was, do you realize that you haven't valued your home? You haven't changed the value of your home insurance in about 7 years. And I said, no, I did not realize that. Thank you for telling me. And so I added the value of the rehabbed kitchen, the value of the solar. And of course, my insurance rates did go up, but I think it was only by about $65 a year. And that is also a PSA reminder to remember to occasionally look at your home insurance value. But you know, it probably will not change a whole lot, in all honesty, if you've recently updated your home insurance value. But if it's been 7 years like it had been for me, it might change just, you know, a little bit, negligible, but it might change a little.
Janelle, are you adding anything?
I can, yeah, kind of my advice to clients, especially buyers that have just purchased, so we kind of know, you know, that we haven't missed. And Catherine's absolutely right. Anybody that has not updated your homeowner's insurance in the last couple of years after the skyrocketing prices really needs to revisit that. In addition to what insurance companies have recently removed from your policy that you may not be aware of. So there's been a lot of insurance company changes. But if anybody had just purchased, then I usually tell them if they've called and asked for a quote and it goes up, to call somebody else and call around, because most insurance companies will not increase the policy amount for the solar being added. And in fact, 2 or 3 offer a green home discount. So call around, get quotes, ask and double check. But it's not been my experience that people are getting gouged by adding solar to their houses.
And I can add one thing on from a homeowner's perspective. Again, this was a while since I sold a home, but that was one of the questions that people had when trying to see if they could afford the home that we were selling. And that was one of them. Hey, will my insurance goes up? We were able to tell them at the time, for us, ours was included in the other structure. So if something happened, you know, the other structures portion of our insurance would cover, you know, damage and things like that to the panels. So we were able to provide that to the potential home buyer and for them to understand and look at their policies as well. So that did help out in the process.
Great. Thank you all for adding insight into that. We had a question that came through that said, is there a difference at closing with solar versus not having solar? And what are the steps that folks should think of? For instance, if they have a net metering policy and et cetera, things that are implicated from the solar purchase. Do you guys have any tips or things to think through on that? Catherine, I saw you shaking your head, so you might have some thoughts.
Sure. As far as the actual closing transaction goes, there's really no difference at all. The difference, however, is what happens after you close, because then you have to reach out to your utility and create that net metering agreement if there is net metering in your state. That is not hard. It's just a matter of getting that done. It's just one more thing to do, a little bit of administrivia, but you definitely want to do that. And it honestly does, once you get into contract and you get past the inspection period, if there is an inspection period, it really does not change anything at all.
I would add that the one caveat to that is if you have a lease. Most lease companies need 14 days to transfer that lease. You don't want to forget about the fact that you have a lease and you've passed that on to the buyer that they are going to take over a lease, because if that's not done in time, you're not closing on time. So usually as soon as I go under contract on something that has a lease, we contact that lease provider and we fill out the paperwork. It usually takes both sides kind of filling out something or calling in to authorize it to be removed from the first party and added to the second party. And that just needs to be completed before you can come to closing. And the other thing is, if there is something different about various states, and most states, your solar can be financed in 3 different ways. So you can pay cash, which there's nothing to do at all with that. But if it is financed with a third-party company that might put a lien on the home. It's financed with a third-party company that does not put a lien on the home, or it's a personal loan. So I can go and take out a personal loan for $15,000 and pay the remainder of the solar on my home if I wanted to. And that can go with me. I don't have to pay it off at closing. But knowing where the loan is, the title company will be aware of whether it's attached to the house or not, whether the house is considered collateral and it has to be paid at closing, or whether it's assumable and that. So no, generally, there's nothing really that you need to do at closing specific, but the financing piece of it, whether it's a lease or a loan, does need to be addressed at some point, and the title rep needs to know what the plan is.
Thanks, Chanel, for adding that. Jonathan, we have a few appraisal questions that I'd like to throw at you. We just have a couple more minutes left, but Peggy had answered had asked in the chat. Speaking of inspections, is there a separate inspection needed for buying and selling when your home has solar? Is the first part, and then part two.
No. And so I just talked to an appraiser today and I just said, hey, listen, because she was new to it. And I said, look, we'll send you the list, as Janelle was referring to, of things that we need to make this valuation. And they're like, well, what if they don't have it? I say, someone has it. And we have found that over these past years that solar installers have records, and they're more than happy to help out because they want to go ahead and, increase the value of solar and homes to be installed. So that's the first answer. Was there a second question that I missed?
Yeah, Shelley had reached out and said she's in Arizona, have solar and storage, and pays a peak demand fee that is pretty high in the summer months. Does that hurt her appraisal typically, or what would you think about that?
I think it all really, when it comes down to for everybody, and we're trying to mimic the marketplace, is at the end of the day, at the end of the year, how much money, show me the money. How much money did you save? That's really what it's all about.
Perfect answer to wrap it up there. Looks like we do have a couple more questions for everyone who's asking about the realtor education. I have the links from Janelle to share, and we'll send that in the follow-up email. So if you have questions on that, we'll share that with everyone so that you can use that and share that with future realtors if you're working with someone. And I'm going to share our link again for our Selling Your Solar Home Guide, as well as plug our help desk for anyone else who has additional questions. Please feel free to reach out to the Solar United Neighbors help desk at helpdesk@solarunitedneighbors.org. And again, we'll include that in the follow-up email. But we'll wrap up here. We just want to thank everyone so much for joining us tonight. Special thanks to our panelists for being a part of the conversation and helping to educate us on this super important topic. It's been really fun to see all the chatter and conversation happening here. And we really appreciate everyone who joined us tonight to be a part of this conversation. And again, we'll share the recording and the links that were dropped into the chat, so you'll have all the resources afterwards that you can reference, and you can feel free to reach out with any additional questions. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Have a great night.